The fire consumed the small wooden house with hungry flames that licked skyward, defying the heavy rain that poured from a moonless night. Sheriff Quinn Maxwell stood motionless, rain streaming down his face, mingling with the sweat that dampened his collar despite the chill. Water dripped from the brim of his hat as lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the charred skeleton of what had once been the Redbird family home. The rain hissed as it met hot embers. The sound reminded Quinn of whispers, accusing whispers that followed him through the streets of Whisper Creek. Once the Maxwell name had meant something in this town. His father had worn the sheriff's badge for 20 years before Quinn. Now that legacy was ash, just like the house before him. Deputy Miller approached, splashing through puddles, holding a lantern that cast grim shadows across his young face. "Sheriff, we found something." Quinn followed him around the back of the smoldering structure to where a tarpaulin had been stretched between 4 posts, creating a makeshift shelter. Beneath it, illuminated by lantern light, lay a body charred beyond recognition. Beside it, a revolver, its barrel warped from heat, but still recognizable. The rain intensified, drumming on the tarpaulin as Quinn crouched beside the body. Something caught his eye. A scrap of paper partially burned, but somehow preserved in the victim's coat pocket. Quinn glanced over his shoulder. No one was watching. He slipped the paper out and unfolded it with careful fingers. In a precise hand were written the words, "The truth lies beneath the dust." Quinn's pulse quickened. He tucked the note into his own pocket before Deputy Miller could see it. Standing, he surveyed the scene with practiced detachment, but inside his mind raced. "What do you make of it, Sheriff?" Miller asked, his voice barely audible above the storm. Quinn didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the gathered townspeople watching from the road. Their faces were shadowed, but he could feel their stares. Some curious, others accusatory. Among them stood Mayor Harrison, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Gather statements from everyone," Quinn finally said. "I want to know who saw what." As Miller moved away, Quinn remained studying the scene. This was the 3rd fire in 3 months, but the first with a body. The Redbird family, a father, mother, and 2 children, had been newcomers to Whisper Creek. Apache, according to town gossip. They'd kept to themselves, farming a small plot of land that had once belonged to the Wilcox estate. Land that his father had helped secure for them against the wishes of many in town. The implications twisted in Quinn's gut like a knife. He'd been finding connections between the fires. Connections that led to his own father's final days as sheriff. Connections to powerful men in Whisper Creek who'd never forgiven the old lawman for his sympathy toward the native families settling in the territory. Quinn touched the paper in his pocket. The truth lies beneath the dust. His father's last words to him had been similar, "Dig deeper, son. The surface only shows what they want you to see." 2 days later, his father had been found dead in his office, a bullet in his head, and a note confessing to corruption. A suicide, they'd said. Quinn had never believed it. As dawn approached, Quinn made his decision. In his small house on the edge of town, he packed a single bag with essentials. He removed his badge, holding it in his palm for a long moment, before placing it on the table alongside his resignation letter. By the time the sun crested the hills, Sheriff Quinn Maxwell had disappeared from Whisper Creek, leaving behind whispers of cowardice and guilt. But he carried with him a determination to find the truth, and a burned scrap of paper that might lead him to it. 18 months later, the afternoon train pulled into Red Rock Station in a cloud of dust and steam. The platform bustled with activity, ranch hands collecting supplies, women in modest dresses holding tight to children's hands, businessmen in suits wiping sweat from their brows. Among those disembarking was Nora Redbird, her height making her stand out even before she stepped fully onto the platform. Tall and strong-limbed, she moved with the natural grace of someone comfortable in their own body, despite the stares it attracted. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple braid that hung to her waist, and her dark eyes took in every detail of the station with cautious assessment. She carried a weathered suitcase gripped in hands that showed the calluses of hard work. The simple blue dress she wore had been carefully mended in places, but was clean and pressed for the occasion. Around her neck hung a small pouch on a leather cord, containing, though none could see it, a pinch of sacred herbs and a smooth river stone passed down through generations of her mother's Apache family. Nora took a deep breath, scanning the faces on the platform. She was looking for a man named Walter Prescott, a cattle rancher who had advertised for a wife in a newspaper that had made its way to the small mining town where she'd been working as a laundress. Their correspondence had been brief but promising. He seeking a hardy woman to help run his ranch, she seeking escape from a life of menial labor and disrespect. From the shadowed edge of the platform, a man observed her arrival. Quinn Hayes, no longer Maxwell, leaned against a post, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He noted the woman's confident bearing, the way she held herself with dignity, despite the curious and sometimes hostile glances thrown her way. Something about her reminded him of the Redbird family from Whisper Creek, though he couldn't place exactly what. He'd been in Red Rock for nearly a year now, working odd jobs and keeping to himself. The small house he'd purchased on the outskirts of town was nothing special, but it provided the solitude he needed. Here, no one knew he had once been a sheriff. No one connected him to the scandal that had driven him from Whisper Creek. He was simply Hayes, the quiet man who occasionally helped the local livery or ranch hands when extra work was available. Quinn watched as a well-dressed man approached Nora. Walter Prescott was in his 40s with a meticulously groomed mustache and clothes that spoke of moderate prosperity. His ranch was one of the smaller operations in the territory, but respectable enough. Quinn had worked for him briefly during the spring roundup. The conversation between Prescott and Nora was brief. Even from a distance, Quinn could see the man's expression change from anticipation to disappointment, then to barely concealed disgust. Prescott's voice carried across the platform as he raised it deliberately. "No one told me the bride would be a mountain." His eyes raked over Nora's tall frame with distaste. "I asked for a refined lady. I got a woman built like a man. No one could call that a wife." The words hit like physical blows. Quinn saw Nora's spine stiffen, saw her grip tighten on the handle of her suitcase. Around them, passengers and townspeople had stopped to watch some smirking others openly laughing. A young boy pointed, shouting, "Look at the giant lady!" But instead of crumbling under the humiliation, Nora straightened to her full height and looked Prescott directly in the eyes. "I came as agreed," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I have fulfilled my part of our arrangement." "Arrangement?" Prescott scoffed. "I didn't arrange to marry an Amazon." He turned his back on her and walked away, disappearing into the crowd that parted for him, leaving Nora standing alone on the platform with her single suitcase and the weight of dozens of staring eyes. Quinn wasn't sure what made him push away from his post and walk toward her. He wasn't in the business of rescuing people anymore, that life had ended in Whisper Creek. And yet something in the woman's dignity and her refusal to collapse under public humiliation stirred something in him. He stopped a few feet away from her. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked simply. Nora turned to look at him, her dark eyes assessing wary. "No," she admitted after a moment. Quinn nodded once. "Then come with me." She didn't move immediately, studying him with the careful scrutiny of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Why, because you shouldn't sit here alone while they point at you," he replied, his voice low and rough from disuse. "You can go in the morning if you want." Their eyes held for a long moment. Quinn could see her weighing him, searching for mockery or ulterior motives. She found neither, just the weathered face of a man who had seen too much and spoke too little. Without another word, Quinn reached down and took her suitcase. It was heavier than he expected. He turned and began walking, not looking back to see if she followed. After a moment's hesitation, Nora did. The road out of town shimmered with heat dust rising in small clouds with each step. Quinn rode his horse at a steady pace, while Nora walked beside him. He hadn't offered her the saddle, and she hadn't asked. The afternoon sun beat down on them, but neither complained about the discomfort. Occasionally, Quinn glanced at his silent companion. She walked with purpose, her steps measured and strong, despite the miles they covered. She'd removed her shoes after the first mile, carrying them in one hand, her feet finding surer footing on the hard-packed earth. It was a practical decision that spoke of experience with long journeys. "It's not much further," Quinn finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. Nora nodded, but offered no reply. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the silhouette of a small structure was beginning to take shape against the backdrop of rolling hills and scattered cottonwoods. As they approached, Quinn's house came into clearer view. A modest wooden structure with a porch that sagged slightly on one side. A small corral stood adjacent, currently empty, save for a few chickens pecking at the dirt. A narrow creek meandered behind the property, lined with stunted trees that provided patches of welcome shade. Quinn dismounted and led his horse to a water trough. 3 days, he said abruptly. "You can stay for 3 days while you figure out where to go next." Nora set down her suitcase and surveyed the property with a critical eye. "I'll earn my keep," she stated, not a question, but a declaration. Quinn shrugged. "Suit yourself." He gestured toward the house. "There's only one bed. I'll sleep in the barn." Inside the house was spare but clean. A single room served as both kitchen and living area, with a curtained-off section, presumably hiding the sleeping quarters. A pot-bellied stove occupied one corner, currently cold in the summer heat. A rough-hewn table with 2 mismatched chairs stood near the only window, which was covered by a threadbare curtain that stirred in the faint breeze. Nora noticed the distinct lack of personal items. No photographs, no decorative touches, nothing that spoke of permanence or attachment. Like her temporary host, the house revealed little of itself. While Quinn tended to his horse, Nora explored the small space that would be her shelter for the next 3 days. Behind the curtain was a narrow bed with a simple quilt. Beneath it, partially hidden, was a wooden box secured with a small padlock. She didn't touch it, but made note of its presence. On the table lay a dog-eared copy of Thoreau's Walden, its pages marked with small pieces of paper. Next to it was a knife with an intricately carved handle, the only item in the house that appeared to hold any sentimental value. Quinn returned with a bucket of water from the creek. "There's food in the cupboard," he said, nodding toward a small cabinet. "Not much, but enough." Nora watched as he moved around the space with the economy of motion that comes from solitary living. There was nothing wasted in his movements, nothing excessive in his words. It was a quality she recognized and respected. As evening approached, Quinn built a small fire outside rather than heating the stove indoors. He cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork, serving it on tin plates without ceremony. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a whippoorwill. The stars emerged one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Nora finished her meal and set the plate aside, then looked up at the constellations taking shape above them. "My grandmother taught me the stars," she said, suddenly breaking the silence. She said, "They're the eyes of our ancestors watching over us." Quinn glanced at her, surprised by the voluntary information. After a moment, he nodded. "My father said something similar, called them holes in the floor of heaven." The brief exchange seemed to exhaust their capacity for conversation. Quinn collected the plates and disappeared into the house, returning with a blanket that he handed to Nora. "Nights get cold even in summer," he said, then gathered his own bedding and headed toward the small barn. Left alone by the dying fire, Nora wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and continued to gaze upward. The constellations were familiar friends, unchanged, despite the vast distance she'd traveled from her birthplace. In a world where everything else shifted and crumbled, the stars remained constant. She wondered about the man who had offered her shelter. His reasons, his past, the careful distance he maintained. There was a story there written in the lines around his eyes, and the way he watched the horizon as if expecting trouble to appear at any moment. But everyone had stories they kept close. She certainly had hers. Nora eventually retreated to the narrow bed behind the curtain. The sheets smelled of sun and dust, clean but impersonal. She placed her small medicine pouch under the pillow and laid her head above it, drawing comfort from its presence. As sleep began to claim her, Nora's last thought was of Walter Prescott's face, not when he'd rejected her, but moments before when anticipation had still brightened his eyes. That brief glimpse of hope, quickly extinguished, reminded her of how swiftly expectations could turn to disappointment. It was a lesson she'd learned many times before. Quinn woke at dawn to find Nora already outside repairing a loose board on his porch. She'd found his small collection of tools and was hammering with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and confident. "You don't need to do that," he said, stepping from the barn, with his blanket rolled under one arm. Nora glanced up a nail held between her lips. She removed it and drove it into the wood with 3 swift strikes before responding. "I don't live on charity," she said, simply returning to her work. Quinn watched her for a moment, noting the strength in her shoulders and the calluses on her hands that spoke of a lifetime of labor. This was not a woman who had been sheltered from hardship. "There's coffee inside," he said finally, and went to tend to his horse. They fell into an unspoken rhythm throughout the day, working separately but in parallel. Quinn mended a section of fence while Nora discovered a small vegetable garden that had been overtaken by weeds. Without asking permission, she set to clearing it, uprooting the invaders and carefully preserving the struggling plants beneath. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Quinn found Nora at the creek, splashing water on her face and neck. She had rolled up her sleeves and the hem of her skirt revealing forearms corded with muscle and legs that had carried her countless miles. She straightened when she sensed his presence, but didn't seem embarrassed to be caught in this moment of vulnerability. "The creek runs year-round," Quinn said, kneeling a respectful distance away to fill his canteen. "Even in the driest summers." Nora nodded. "Good water is precious out here." It was a simple observation that carried the weight of experience. Quinn wondered where she had learned such lessons, what hardships she had endured to speak of water with such reverence. As she turned to head back to the house, Quinn noticed something that made him freeze. Across her upper back, visible where her damp dress clung to her skin, were the unmistakable ridges of scars, old ones, long-healed, but permanently etched into her flesh. He quickly looked away, but not before Nora caught his gaze. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She knew what he had seen. He knew not to ask. Some stories were told only when the teller was ready, if ever. That evening, after another simple meal shared in comfortable silence, Quinn pulled a bottle from beneath a loose floorboard in the house. The whiskey caught the firelight as he poured two modest measures into tin cups. He offered one to Nora, who accepted it with a slight nod. 3 days, she said, echoing his earlier statement. Tomorrow I should look for work in town. Quinn took a slow sip before responding. Town's not always kind to strangers. It was as close as he would come to acknowledging what had happened at the train station. I'm used to that, Nora replied, her voice matter-of-fact, rather than self-pitying. Quinn studied her over the rim of his cup. What kind of work do you do? Whatever's needed, she shrugged. Laundry, cooking, field work. I'm strong, and I learn fast. They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence than before, less guarded, more companionable. The whiskey had softened the edges of their caution. As night deepened, Quinn found himself watching Nora's profile against the firelight. There was something familiar about her features, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. It nagged at him like a half-remembered dream. The fence on the north side needs repair, he said suddenly. Could use an extra pair of hands, if you wanted to stay longer than 3 days. The offer surprised them both. Quinn hadn't planned to say it, and Nora clearly hadn't expected to hear it. She considered him carefully before answering. I'll think about it. That night, as Quinn settled into his makeshift bed in the barn, he found himself wondering about the woman sleeping in his house. He'd been alone for so long that the presence of another person felt both intrusive and oddly comforting. She asked few questions and demanded nothing beyond basic courtesy. In his experience, such restraint was rare. His hand drifted to the inner pocket of his jacket, where he kept the charred note from Whisper Creek. The truth lies beneath the dust. 18 months, and he was no closer to understanding what it meant or who had written it. Sometimes he wondered if he was chasing ghosts, trying to vindicate a father who might have been guilty after all. Sleep came slowly, accompanied by the familiar nightmares. Fire consuming a small house, a body charred beyond recognition, and his father's voice whispering, "Dig deeper, son." A scream tore through the darkness, jolting Quinn awake. For a disorienting moment, he didn't know where he was. The barn, Red Rock miles from Whisper Creek. The scream came again, and this time he recognized it wasn't part of his nightmare. It was coming from the house. Quinn grabbed his revolver and ran barefoot across the yard, bursting through the door with his weapon drawn. In the dim moonlight, filtering through the window, he could make out Nora thrashing on the bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "No!" she cried out, her voice raw with terror. "Father, run!" Quinn hesitated, unsure whether to wake her. Before he could decide, Nora's eyes snapped open. She bolted upright, a small knife appearing in her hand from beneath her pillow. "It's me," Quinn said, quickly lowering his gun. "You were dreaming." Nora blinked, reality slowly replacing whatever horrors had haunted her sleep. The knife remained in her grip, steady despite her rapid breathing. "Sorry," she said, finally tucking the blade back under her pillow. "I didn't mean to wake you." Quinn nodded, holstering his revolver. He should have left, then returned to the barn and given her privacy to compose herself. Instead, he moved to the stove and lit a small lamp. "I'll make tea," he said, not looking at her directly. It was what his mother had always done when nightmares visited, a simple gesture of comfort without the awkwardness of words. Nora didn't object. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and moved to sit at the table, her face composed once more, but her eyes still haunted by whatever she had seen in her dreams. Quinn heated water and found the tin of tea leaves he rarely used. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Nora watching him, assessing him anew in the wake of her vulnerability. "I dream of fire," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn's hands stilled momentarily. "I understand," he replied, the words inadequate but sincere. When the tea was ready, he placed a steaming cup before her and took the other chair, cradling his own drink between his palms. "My village burned when I was 14. Nora continued, staring into her cup as if reading the leaves at the bottom. "Men came in the night, white men with torches and guns." Quinn remained silent, offering neither pity nor judgment, only his attention. "My father got me out through the back of our lodge," she went on. "Told me to run to the hills and not look back." She took a sip of tea, her expression distant. "I looked back anyway, saw them drag him out, saw what they did to him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken details Quinn could imagine all too well. "I'm sorry," he said finally, because there was nothing else to say. Nora met his eyes across the table. "Everyone has nightmares, Mr. Hayes. What are yours about?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered deflecting, retreating behind the walls he'd built so carefully. But there was something in Nora's direct gaze that demanded honesty. "Fire," he admitted, "and a dead man whose face I can't see." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Something in Nora's expression suggested she knew the difference. They finished their tea in silence. When Nora stood to return to bed, Quinn moved toward the door, but her voice stopped him. "Stay," she said. "Take the chair. It's your house." He should have refused, should have maintained the proper distance. Instead, Quinn nodded and settled into the chair, stretching his legs toward the stove's dying warmth. Nora returned to the bed, pulling the curtain closed between them. In the quiet that followed, Quinn listened to her breathing gradually slow and deepen as she fell back into sleep. He remained awake, watching the shadows play across the ceiling and thinking about fire. How it consumed, how it transformed, how it left nothing but ash and questions in its wake. When dawn came, Quinn woke with a stiff neck from sleeping upright in the chair. The curtain to the sleeping area was open, the bed empty and neatly made. Outside, he found Nora at the water pump, washing her face in the early morning light. Neither mentioned the night's events. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, Quinn announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "You're welcome to come along," he added, not looking directly at Nora. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll get my things." As Nora disappeared into the house, Quinn prepared the horse. He wasn't sure why he'd invited her. Practicality, perhaps, or some obscure sense of obligation. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he'd grown tired of his own company. When Nora emerged, she was wearing her blue dress again, freshly brushed, and with her hair neatly braided. She carried her small satchel as if expecting not to return. "You can leave your things here," Quinn said, "if you're coming back." The statement hung between them, neither question nor command. Nora studied him for a long moment before setting the satchel on the porch. "I'll come back," she said finally. "The garden still needs work." It was as close to an acceptance of his offer as she was likely to give. Quinn nodded and mounted his horse, then extended his hand to help her up behind him. Nora hesitated only briefly before accepting his hand and swinging up behind him with surprising grace for a woman of her height. She settled on the horse's back, maintaining a careful distance between her body and his. "Hold on," Quinn advised as he urged the horse forward. After a moment's hesitation, Nora placed her hands lightly on his sides. It was the first physical contact they had shared, and both were acutely aware of it. The ride to town passed in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Quinn was conscious of Nora's presence behind him, her steady breathing, the faint scent of sage that seemed to cling to her clothes, the careful way she balanced to avoid pressing against him. As they approached Red Rock, Quinn felt Nora tense. He understood her apprehension. Yesterday's humiliation would still be fresh, and small towns had long memories. "We'll be quick," he assured her. "Feed store general merchandise, then back." Nora didn't respond, but he felt her straighten her spine, bracing herself for whatever might come. The town was busy with Saturday traffic, ranch hands collecting their weekly supplies, families attending to errands, the saloon already doing steady business despite the early hour. Heads turned as Quinn and Nora rode past curious eyes, taking in the unexpected pair. Quinn dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Nora down. This time she took it without hesitation, her grip firm and brief. They tied the horse at a hitching post outside the general store. "I need to speak with the feed merchant," Quinn said. "Will you be all right here?" Nora nodded. "I can manage a few stairs, Mr. Hayes." Inside the store, Quinn selected the items they needed efficiently: flour, coffee, salt, a few canned goods. He added a bolt of sturdy cotton fabric to his purchases, almost as an afterthought, avoiding the shopkeeper's curious glance as he did so. As he waited for the items to be tallied, Quinn overheard two men talking in lowered voices near the back of the store. "Prescott's mail-order bride," one was saying. "Can you imagine built like a barn door?" "Apache, too, from the looks of her," the other replied with a sneer in his voice. "Prescott dodged a bullet there." Quinn's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He paid for his purchases and gathered them without acknowledging the gossip. Outside, he found Nora examining a notice board outside the sheriff's office. Her face was composed, giving no indication whether she had encountered any direct hostility during his absence. "Ready?" he asked, securing the packages to his saddle. Nora nodded, but her attention remained on the board. "There's a reward posted," she said, "for information about a bank robbery up north." Quinn glanced at the poster without much interest. "There's always a reward for something. $500 is a lot of money," Nora observed. "Not worth the risk of going after men desperate enough to rob a bank." Quinn countered his tone, suggesting the subject was closed. As they prepared to leave town, a commotion near the saloon caught their attention. Walter Prescott emerged flanked by two other men. His gaze fell on Nora, and his expression darkened with recognition and embarrassment. Quinn tensed, ready for confrontation, but Prescott merely nudged his companions and muttered something that made them laugh. The deliberate slight was perhaps more cutting than any direct insult could have been. Nora's face remained impassive, but Quinn noticed her hands clench briefly at her sides. Without comment, he helped her mount the horse and swung up behind her. They were nearly at the edge of town when a young boy darted in front of them, waving a newspaper. "Paper, Mr. Hot, off the press from Denver." Quinn was about to refuse when Nora leaned forward. "How much?" "2 cents, ma'am," the boy replied, clearly startled by her height and direct manner. Nora produced the coins from a small purse and accepted the paper with a nod of thanks. The boy, no more than 12, with dark skin and features that suggested Mexican heritage, stared at her with open curiosity rather than hostility. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, then glanced at Quinn. "You're Hayes, right, the one who lives out by Cottonwood Creek." Quinn nodded, surprised to be recognized. He kept to himself enough that few in town knew him by name. "I'm Theo," the boy continued. "I deliver mail sometimes. If you want regular papers, I can bring them out to you." Before Quinn could refuse, Nora spoke again. "We'd like that, Theo. Once a week?" The boy grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "Yes, ma'am. Every Saturday." As they rode away, Quinn gave Nora a questioning glance. "News is valuable out here," she said by way of explanation. "And the boy could use the coins." Quinn couldn't argue with either point, though he wondered when "I" had become "we" in Nora's thinking. The return journey was more relaxed than their trip into town. Nora seemed to have weathered the potential discomfort of returning to Red Rock, and Quinn found himself surprisingly pleased by this. As they approached the house, Nora broke their comfortable silence. "3 days have passed, Mr. Hayes." Quinn reined in the horse before responding. "The offer still stands. Stay if you want. There's work enough." Nora was quiet for a long moment. "I'll stay," she said finally. "For now." It wasn't much of a commitment, but Quinn found himself unexpectedly satisfied with her answer. He'd grown accustomed to her presence more quickly than he would have thought possible. "Good," he said simply, and urged the horse forward toward home. Life settled into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Quinn and Nora worked side by side during daylight hours, repairing fences, tending the garden, and making small improvements to the house. They spoke little, but developed an easy understanding of each other's movements and needs. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset, paint the landscape in gold and crimson. Sometimes they shared the newspaper that Theo faithfully delivered each Saturday, taking turns reading articles of interest aloud. Other times they simply existed in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. Their nightmares continued, though less frequently. On the nights when one of them woke gasping or crying out, the other would wordlessly prepare tea or simply sit nearby until the shadows receded. They never spoke of their pasts during these midnight encounters, as if by unspoken agreement. The darkness might witness their vulnerabilities, but daylight would restore the protective boundaries both needed. On one such night, Quinn woke to find Nora sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, a dark curtain against the pale fabric of her nightdress. "Rebecca," he mumbled, still half caught in his dream. Nora turned her expression questioning. Quinn rubbed his face, chasing away the remnants of sleep and the vivid images that had haunted him. "Nothing," he said. "Just a dream." But Nora's curiosity had been sparked. "Who is Rebecca?" she asked quietly. Quinn considered deflecting the question, but found he lacked the energy for evasion. "My father's assistant," he said finally. "She died in a fire." It was more than he had intended to reveal, but less than the whole truth. Rebecca had been more than his father's assistant. She had been his confidant, and Quinn suspected the keeper of many of his father's secrets. Her death in a suspicious fire just weeks before his father's alleged suicide had never been properly investigated. Nora seemed to sense there was more to the story, but didn't press. Instead, she offered a piece of her own past. "My mother's name was Sparrow," she said. "She died when I was very young. Fever." Quinn nodded, understanding this exchange for what it was. Not an invitation to deeper confidences, but a momentary lowering of guards. A recognition that they were both carrying weights they rarely set down. The following afternoon, while Quinn was checking fence lines on the far side of the property, Nora decided to thoroughly clean the house. It was a task she'd been meaning to undertake, and Quinn's absence provided the perfect opportunity. She worked methodically, sweeping, scrubbing, and rearranging the sparse furnishings to better suit their shared use of the space. When she reached the sleeping area, Nora stripped the bed and lifted the thin mattress to turn it. Beneath it, partially concealed by the bed frame, was the wooden box she had noticed on her first night. The small padlock securing it gleamed dully in the afternoon light. Nora hesitated, aware that she was crossing a boundary. The box clearly contained Quinn's private possessions, things he had deliberately hidden from view. She should replace the mattress and forget she had seen it. Instead, she examined the lock more closely. It was a simple mechanism, one she could easily pick if she chose to. Years of surviving on her own had taught her such skills, though she rarely had cause to use them now. Nora glanced toward the window. Quinn was nowhere in sight, likely still at the far end of the property. She had time. Using a hairpin from her braid, Nora manipulated the lock with practiced fingers. It gave way with a soft click, opening in her hands almost apologetically. Inside the box lay a carefully organized collection of items: a tarnished sheriff's badge, newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, and a small leather-bound journal. Beneath these was a folded piece of paper, its edges charred and blackened. Nora's heart quickened. She removed the paper with careful fingers and unfolded it, revealing the same precise handwriting she had seen in the journal. "The truth lies beneath the dust." The cryptic message meant nothing to her, but the fact that Quinn had preserved it, hidden it, suggested its importance. She returned the paper to its place and examined the other items. The newspaper clippings detailed a scandal in a town called Whisper Creek. Allegations of corruption against the sheriff, followed by his suicide. The name Maxwell appeared repeatedly, and with a start Nora realized this must be Quinn's true surname. Before she could read further, the distant sound of hoofbeats alerted her to Quinn's return. Quickly, Nora replaced the contents of the box, locked it, and slid it back under the mattress. She had just finished remaking the bed when the front door opened. "I'm almost finished in here," she called, fighting to keep her voice casual. Quinn appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression unreadable as always. "Wasn't necessary," he said, glancing around at the freshly cleaned space. "I don't mind," Nora replied, avoiding his eyes. It needed doing. That evening a tension hung between them that hadn't been present before. Nora was acutely aware of her transgression, while Quinn seemed to sense that something had shifted. They ate in uncomfortable silence, neither willing to acknowledge the change. After the meal, Quinn surprised her by producing a bottle of whiskey. Not the rough stuff he normally kept, but a better quality reserved for special occasions. "Been saving this," he said, pouring 2 generous measures. "Seemed like a good night for it." Nora accepted the offered glass, studying Quinn's face for any sign that he knew what she had done. His expression revealed nothing, but she noticed a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "To quiet nights," Quinn said, raising his glass in a toast, "and buried secrets," Nora added before she could stop herself. Quinn's eyes sharpened on her face. "What do you mean by that?" Nora met his gaze steadily. "Everyone has them, Mr. Hayes, or should I say Mr. Maxwell." The glass froze halfway to Quinn's lips. A muscle twitched in his jaw, and for a moment, Nora thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then, with deliberate care, he set his drink down and leaned back in his chair. "You went through my things," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Nora admitted, seeing no point in lying. "I apologize for the invasion of privacy." Quinn regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Most people would deny it," he observed. "I'm not most people." "No," Quinn agreed, "you're not." A silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken questions. Finally, Quinn sighed and reclaimed his whiskey, downing it in a single swallow. "You should know who you're living with," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I was Sheriff Quinn Maxwell in Whisper Creek. My father held the badge before me. He was found dead in his office, supposedly by his own hand after corruption allegations. I never believed it." He refilled his glass, avoiding Nora's eyes. 3 months later, a fire killed a family. The Redbirds. Apache, like you. I found evidence that suggested it wasn't an accident, evidence that might have cleared my father's name. But before I could pursue it, I was forced to resign. The town turned against me. Quinn finally looked at Nora, his eyes hard with remembered bitterness. "I left, rather than face a mockery of justice. Been here ever since, trying to forget." Nora absorbed this information in silence, connecting it to the items she had seen in the box. "And the note?" she asked. The one that was burned. A flicker of surprise crossed Quinn's face. "You are thorough," he murmured. "I found it at the Redbird fire scene in the pocket of a body. I've never figured out what it means." "The truth lies beneath the dust," Nora repeated softly. Quinn nodded. "My father said something similar before he died. Dig deeper, son." I've been trying to understand what they were both pointing to. Nora considered this, turning her glass slowly in her hands. "Redbird," she said finally. "That's my name too. Nora Redbird." Quinn went very still, his eyes fixed on her face with new intensity. "What? The family? In Whisper Creek. They might have been my relatives," Nora continued. "My father's brother moved his family south years ago. We lost touch." The implications hung between them, heavy with possibility and dread. Could it be mere coincidence that Nora had ended up here in Quinn's house, bearing the same name as the family whose deaths had driven him from Whisper Creek? Before either could explore this connection further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. Quinn rose immediately, reaching for the rifle he kept near the door. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice once again that of a lawman. Nora ignored the command, following him onto the porch. In the fading light, they could make out a single rider approaching at a steady pace. As the figure drew closer, Quinn relaxed slightly. "It's just Theo," he said, recognizing the boy's slight frame. Indeed, it was the young newspaper seller, though his unexpected arrival at this hour suggested urgency. Theo reined in his small pony before the house, his face flushed with exertion. "Mr. Hayes?" he called, dismounting quickly. "Miss Redbird, you need to see this." He thrust a newspaper into Quinn's hands. It wasn't the regular Denver publication, but a smaller regional paper. Quinn unfolded it, holding it so Nora could read alongside him. The headline stood out in bold type: "Notorious bank robber spotted in territory. Reward increased to 1,000. Below was a crude sketch of a man that bore a striking resemblance to Quinn himself. "People in town are talking," Theo said breathlessly, "saying you might be him, Maxwell the sheriff who turned outlaw up north." Quinn and Nora exchanged a look of shared understanding. Their quiet existence was about to be shattered, and the past Quinn had been running from had finally caught up with him. "Come inside, Theo," Quinn said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "We need to talk." As they turned toward the house, a flicker of movement in the distant trees caught Nora's attention. She paused, scanning the darkening landscape with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Quinn asked, noticing her hesitation. Nora shook her head slowly. "Nothing," she said. "Just shadows." But as she followed the others inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the arrival of the newspaper was only the beginning of their troubles. Quinn closed the door behind them, his movements deliberate and controlled, despite the tension evident in his shoulders. The newspaper lay on the table between them like a live coal, its headline glaring up accusingly. "You're not really him, are you?" Theo asked, eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and excitement. "The outlaw." Quinn's expression remained carefully neutral. "No, I'm not a bank robber." He pulled out a chair for the boy. "But I am Quinn Maxwell, former sheriff of Whisper Creek." Nora moved quietly around them, lighting a lamp and putting water on to boil. Her mind worked rapidly, connecting pieces of a puzzle that was still largely incomplete. "Someone wants people to think you're the robber." She observed, her tone matter-of-fact. Quinn nodded. "The resemblance in that sketch isn't accidental." Theo glanced between them, confusion evident on his young face. "But why would someone do that? To flush me out? Or to make sure I never return to Whisper Creek?" Quinn ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. The question is, who and why now, after all this time? Nora placed 3 cups of tea on the table and took a seat. Tell us everything, she said quietly. From the beginning. Quinn hesitated, years of practiced reticence warring with necessity. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he began. My father was Sheriff Everett Maxwell for 20 years. He was a good man, fair to everyone, regardless of their background or color. Quinn's eyes flicked briefly to Nora. That made him unpopular with some of the powerful men in town, especially when he started allocating land to native families who'd been displaced. He took a sip of tea before continuing. About 2 years ago, he began investigating land deals that didn't seem right. Properties changing hands under suspicious circumstances, always ending up owned by the same few people. The mining company, Nora interjected, the pieces falling into place. Quinn looked at her sharply. How did you know that it's always mining or railroads? She replied with a bitter edge to her voice. They want the land and they don't care who's living on it. Quinn nodded grimly. My father found evidence of forgery, intimidation, even murder disguised as accidents. He kept detailed records which he shared with his assistant, Rebecca. The woman from your nightmare, Nora said softly. Quinn's jaw tightened. Rebecca was found dead in a fire at her home. A week later, my father supposedly shot himself in his office, leaving behind a confession of corruption and bribery. I never believed it was suicide. Theo leaned forward, completely engrossed. What did you do? I became sheriff, started my own investigation quietly. Then the Redbird family was killed. Quinn's eyes met Nora's. 4 people burned to death in their home. The official ruling was accidental, but I found evidence suggesting otherwise. What evidence? Nora asked, her voice steady, despite the personal connection to the tragedy. Boot prints that didn't match any of the victims, signs that the fire had multiple points of origin. And this. Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew the charred note, placing it carefully on the table. Found it on a body near the back door. Theo stared at the paper with wide eyes. The truth lies beneath the dust, he read aloud. What does it mean? I don't know, Quinn admitted. But 3 days after I found it, allegations surfaced that I was working with bank robbers up north. Suddenly, there were witnesses claiming they'd seen me meeting with known criminals, evidence of money I couldn't explain. The town turned against me almost overnight. So you left, Nora concluded. I left, Quinn confirmed. Thought it would blow over eventually, that I'd find answers from a distance. Never expected they'd still be hunting me 18 months later. A heavy silence fell over the room as they each considered the implications. Finally, Theo spoke, his voice small but determined. People in town are already talking. By tomorrow, someone will recognize your name from the paper. Quinn nodded. I know, which is why you both need to leave first thing in the morning. It's not safe here anymore. No, Nora said firmly. The single word carried such conviction that both Quinn and Theo turned to her in surprise. Running won't solve this. If they're hunting you again now, there's a reason. Miss Redbird is right, Theo added quickly. Something must have happened. Something they're afraid of. Quinn looked between them, a mixture of frustration and reluctant agreement on his face. Even if that's true, I can't put you in danger. My family died in that fire, Nora reminded him, her dark eyes intense. If you were right, if it wasn't an accident, then I have more at stake in this than anyone. Quinn held her gaze for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, for he nodded slowly. All right, but we need to be smart about this. He turned to Theo. What exactly are people saying in town? The boy straightened, clearly pleased to be taken seriously. Mostly just gossip so far. Some folks think you might be the outlaw, but others don't believe it. Mr. Prescott was in the saloon saying he always knew there was something suspicious about you. Quinn's mouth twitched. I'm sure he did. There's a stranger in town, too, Theo continued. Been asking questions about new settlers in the area. Tall man, well-dressed, has a star on his vest. A marshal, Quinn murmured, his expression darkening. Federal, Theo shrugged. Didn't say, just that he's looking for someone. Quinn exchanged a glance with Nora. This complicates things. What do we do? She asked. Quinn considered for a moment. We need more information. About this marshal, about what's happening in Whisper Creek, about who's behind the sketch in the paper. I can help, Theo volunteered eagerly. Nobody notices kids. I can listen, watch things. Quinn shook his head firmly. It's too dangerous. But No, Theo. Quinn interrupted. I won't have you putting yourself at risk. The boy's face fell, but he nodded reluctantly. Nora placed a gentle hand on Theo's shoulder. You've already helped by bringing us the newspaper, she assured him. The best thing you can do now is act normally. If anyone asks, you delivered the paper and left. You didn't stay to talk. Theo nodded solemnly. I can do that. It's getting late, Quinn observed, glancing out the window at the darkened landscape. You should stay here tonight, Theo. Head back at first light. As Nora prepared a place for the boy to sleep, Quinn stepped outside onto the porch. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the velvet sky like diamond dust. He scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that they were being watched. Nothing moved except the gentle swaying of tree branches in the breeze. Yet Quinn couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him like a shroud. Nora joined him silently, her presence a quiet comfort in the darkness. Do you think they'll come for you? She asked, her voice low enough not to carry back inside. Quinn considered the question. Not tonight, but soon. Then we should be ready. He glanced at her, noting the determination in her profile. This isn't your fight, Nora. She turned to face him, fully moonlight, silvering the planes of her face. If the redbirds who died were my family, then it became my fight the moment their house burned. Quinn couldn't argue with her logic, nor did he particularly want to. In the short time they had known each other, he had come to respect Nora's judgment and resilience. Besides, she added, with the ghost of a smile, who else will watch your back? The question hung between them, laden with meaning, neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Quinn nodded, finally accepting both her decision and what it implied about their relationship. We'll need supplies, he said, shifting to practical matters. And a plan. Tomorrow, Nora suggested. After Theo leaves, for now we should rest. Quinn agreed, though he doubted either of them would find much sleep that night. As they turned to go back inside, Nora paused, her head tilted slightly as if listening. Did you hear that? Quinn tensed hand, moving instinctively to his holstered revolver. What? A horse, she murmured. Far off, moving away. Quinn strained his ears, but could detect nothing beyond the usual night sounds. Still, he had learned to trust Nora's senses. Someone was watching us, he concluded grimly. Nora nodded. And now they know we're aware of them. The implication was clear. Whatever time they might have had to prepare had just shortened considerably. Rain arrived with the dawn, a steady downpour that transformed the dusty yard into mud and beat a constant rhythm on the roof. Quinn stood at the window watching droplets race down the glass, while Nora prepared a simple breakfast for Theo. You can't go back in this, Quinn told the boy, gesturing to the sheets of water visible through the window. Theo looked disappointed. But my ma will worry if I don't come home. Nora placed a plate of cornbread before him. The rain will let up eventually, she assured him. Eat now and we'll see what the weather does. Quinn joined them at the table, his face drawn from a night of fitful sleep. Tell me about this marshal again, he requested. Every detail you can remember. Theo chewed thoughtfully. He's tall like you, has a scar here. He traced a line across his left cheek. Wears a black coat even in the heat. Keeps to himself mostly, but buys drinks for anyone who'll talk to him. Has he mentioned Whisper Creek? Theo shook his head. Not that I heard. Just says he's looking for a fugitive. Quinn exchanged a glance with Nora. That could be me, or it could be the actual bank robber. Or it could be someone else entirely, Nora pointed out. We shouldn't assume. True enough, Quinn conceded. What else, Theo? Any sense of where he's from? He talks funny, the boy offered. Not like folks around here. Eastern accent, Quinn pressed. Theo shrugged. Maybe. Oh, and I heard the bartender call him Reeves. Quinn stiffened slightly, a reaction so subtle only Nora noticed. She raised an eyebrow in silent question, but Quinn gave a small shake of his head, indicating they would discuss it later. By mid-morning, the rain had slackened to a drizzle. Theo, growing restless with confinement, was eager to leave. Remember, Quinn cautioned as the boy prepared to depart, you were never here, just delivered the paper and left. Theo nodded solemnly. I know, but what if I hear something important? Quinn considered this. The creek makes a bend about halfway between here and town. There's a hollow tree on the bank. If you need to get a message to us, leave it there. The boy's face lit up at the clandestine arrangement. Like real spies. Despite the gravity of the situation, Quinn's mouth twitched in amusement. Just be careful, Theo. These aren't games we're playing. After seeing the boy off, Quinn and Nora retreated to the house to plan their next steps. The rain had intensified again, confining them indoors and lending an air of isolation to their discussions. You recognized the name, Nora stated, once they were alone. It wasn't a question. Quinn nodded, pouring coffee for them both. Harlan Reeves. He was the federal marshal who investigated my father's death, ruled it suicide without looking at any evidence that suggested otherwise. And now he's here, Nora observed, looking for you, so it would seem. Why? Nora's direct question cut to the heart of the matter. After all this time, why come after you now? Quinn considered this, turning the coffee cup in his hands. Something must have changed. Someone might have found evidence that threatens them, or perhaps they're planning something that requires ensuring all loose ends are tied up. Including you. Including me? He agreed grimly. Nora leaned forward, her expression intent. The note said, the truth lies beneath the dust. What if it's literal? What if there's something buried somewhere? Quinn's eyes sharpened. My father's records. They were never found after his death, but I always suspected Rebecca had hidden them somewhere. And if someone else is looking for them too, then I need to find them first, Quinn concluded. Nora nodded. We need to find them. But first, we need to know more about what's happening in Whisper Creek now. I can't go back there, Quinn reminded her. I'd be recognized instantly. I wouldn't, Nora pointed out. I could go ask questions, listen. Quinn shook his head firmly. Too dangerous, especially if you start asking about the Redbird fire. It would raise suspicions immediately. Then what do you suggest? Before Quinn could answer, a sound outside caught their attention. The unmistakable approach of horses, multiple riders moving at a steady pace, despite the rain. Quinn was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window with his hand on his revolver. Company, he said tersely. At least 3 riders. Nora joined him, peering through the rain-streaked glass. 3 figures on horseback were approaching the house, their features indistinct through the downpour. "Reeves?" she asked quietly. Quinn shook his head. "Can't tell." As the riders drew closer, Quinn recognized Walter Prescott in the lead, flanked by 2 men he didn't know. Relief mingled with suspicion. Prescott was no friend, but he wasn't a federal marshal either. "It's Prescott," Quinn informed Nora, noting the way her shoulders tensed at the name. "What does he want? Let's find out." Quinn moved to the door, positioning himself so his revolver would remain hidden from view, but readily accessible if needed. The riders reined in before the house water streaming from their hats and coats. Prescott dismounted first, his usual polished appearance diminished by the weather, but his air of self-importance intact. "Hayes," he called, remaining in the rain rather than approaching the porch. "Got a minute?" Quinn stepped onto the covered porch, keeping his expression neutral. "Kind of wet for a social call, Prescott." Walter's mouth twisted in what might have been intended as a smile. "Not social. Business." His eyes flicked past Quinn to where Nora stood in the doorway. "I see you're still harboring the Amazon." Quinn felt rather than saw Nora stiffen behind him. "State your business or move on," he said coldly. Prescott's false smile disappeared. "Word is, you're not who you say you are, Hayes. Or should I call you Maxwell?" So it had begun already. Quinn remained expressionless. "My name's my own concern." "Not when there's a reward involved," one of Prescott's companions interjected. He was a burly man with a week's growth of beard and small, calculating eyes. "That's right," Walter agreed. $1,000 is a lot of money, enough to make it worth our while to bring you in." Quinn's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his revolver. "I'm not the man they're looking for." "That's for the marshal to decide," Prescott countered. "He's offering $100 just for information leading to your capture. Imagine what he'd pay for delivery." "You'd believe a wanted poster over your own experience." Quinn's voice remained calm, reasonable. "I worked for you during spring roundup. Did I seem like a bank robber to you?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Prescott's face, quickly suppressed. "People aren't always what they seem." "No," Quinn agreed, "they aren't." A tense silence followed, broken only by the steady patter of rain. Finally, Prescott shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "We're not here to make trouble, Hayes. Just thought you should know people are talking. Marshals asking questions. Might be a good time to move on." The warning was clear, as was the implied threat. Quinn nodded once, acknowledging both. "Appreciate the courtesy call." Prescott turned his horse, preparing to leave, then paused. "That offer I made still stands," he said, his eyes on Nora. "For the land. Fair price cash money. Enough to start fresh somewhere else." "Not interested," Quinn replied flatly. Prescott shrugged. "Suit yourself. But things might get uncomfortable around here for a man with secrets. Think about it." With that, he spurred his horse, his companions following, as they rode back the way they had come. Quinn watched until they disappeared into the curtain of rain before turning to Nora. "He's made offers for this place before." Nora's eyes were thoughtful. "The land must be valuable to someone." Quinn nodded slowly. "Or there's something on it they want." "The truth beneath the dust," Nora murmured. Their eyes met in sudden understanding. The answer might be closer than they had realized, literally beneath their feet. The rain continued throughout the day, keeping them confined to the house. They used the time to take inventory of their supplies and weapons and to discuss possible locations where something might be hidden on the property. The previous owner was an old prospector, Quinn explained as he cleaned his revolver at the table. Lived here for nearly 30 years before selling to me. Did he find anything? Nora asked, mending a tear in Quinn's spare shirt with neat, even stitches. Quinn shook his head. Not that I know of. He moved to San Francisco to live with his daughter. The creek would be a natural place to look for gold, Nora observed. Have you ever panned it? No reason to. I needed a place to lie low, not wealth. Quinn reassembled his gun with practiced efficiency. But you're right. If there's anything valuable on this property, the creek is the most likely location. We'll search it when the rain stops, Nora decided. She set aside the mended shirt and regarded Quinn thoughtfully. If Prescott comes back with more men, or if this Marshal Reeves finds you, what then? Quinn considered the question carefully. Reeves is the greater threat. He has the authority to arrest me, and he's not likely to listen to explanations. And Prescott is a coward at heart. He won't risk himself unless the odds are heavily in his favor. Quinn holstered his revolver. But he might sell information to Reeves if he thinks there's profit in it. Nora nodded, accepting this assessment. We should be prepared to leave quickly if necessary. Already am, Quinn admitted. Have been since the day I arrived. This revelation didn't seem to surprise Nora. A fugitive's habit, she noted without judgment. As evening approached, the rain finally began to ease though dark clouds still hung low over the landscape. Quinn prepared a simple meal, while Nora checked that their few windows were securely shuttered. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the coming days might bring. After cleaning away the dishes, Nora surprised Quinn by producing a deck of cards from her satchel. My father taught me to play, she explained, shuffling with practiced ease. Said it kept the mind sharp and passed the time. Quinn accepted the deal with a nod of thanks. My father preferred chess, but cards were more practical on the trail. They played several hands, the simple activity providing a welcome distraction from their concerns. As Quinn dealt a new round, he found himself studying Nora's face in the lamplight. Why did you really come here? He asked suddenly. To Red Rock, I mean. Nora looked up, momentarily startled by the direct question. I told you. Walter's advertisement. No, Quinn interrupted gently. The real reason. Nora set down her cards, her expression becoming guarded. What makes you think there was another reason? Because you're too smart to believe a man like Prescott would make a good husband, Quinn replied, and too proud to sell yourself for security. For a long moment, Nora was silent, weighing what to reveal. Finally, she sighed. I was looking for my father's brother and his family. My uncle Thomas Redbird moved south with his wife and children years ago. Last we heard, they had settled near a town called Whisper Creek. Quinn's eyes widened slightly as the pieces fell into place. You came looking for your relatives, the ones who died in the fire. Nora nodded. I didn't know they were dead until I read those newspaper clippings in your box. I was working in a mining camp up north when I saw Walter's advertisement for a wife in Red Rock. The name meant nothing to me, but the location was close enough to Whisper Creek that I thought I might find information about my uncle's family. And then you found me instead, Quinn observed. Yes, Nora agreed with a small, ironic smile. I found you instead. The coincidence seemed almost too great to be believed, yet Quinn could see no deception in Nora's steady gaze. If anything, her revelation explained the immediate connection he had felt with her, the sense that their meeting was somehow meant to be. Do you believe in fate, Nora? He asked quietly. She considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I believe in patterns, she finally replied. In things that are meant to align like stars, forming constellations. Quinn nodded, understanding her meaning. Then perhaps we're part of the same pattern. Nora held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, something shifting in her expression. "Perhaps we are." The moment was interrupted by a sudden sound outside, a horse approaching at speed. Both were instantly alert, moving with practiced coordination. Quinn doused the lamp, while Nora retrieved his rifle from beside the door. In the darkness, they waited listening as the rider drew nearer. The hoofbeats slowed as they approached the house, the rider clearly taking care not to announce their arrival too loudly. Quinn positioned himself beside the window, carefully pulling back the edge of the shutter to peer outside. The clouds had parted enough to allow moonlight to illuminate the yard, revealing a single rider dismounting near the porch. "It's Theo," Quinn whispered, recognizing the boy's slight frame. He moved quickly to the door, opening it just as Theo reached the porch steps. The boy's face was flushed with exertion and excitement, his clothes damp from the recent rain. "Mr. Hayes," he gasped, "you need to leave now. The marshal knows you're here. He's gathering men in town to come arrest you at dawn." Quinn pulled the boy inside, closing and bolting the door behind him. "How do you know this?" "I heard him talking in the saloon," Theo explained breathlessly. He showed Prescott a different poster, one with your real name and face on it. "Says you're wanted for murder and arson in Whisper Creek." Quinn and Nora exchanged alarmed glances. "Murder," Nora repeated. "Who do they claim he killed? The Redbird family." Theo replied, oblivious to the significance of the name to his listeners. "And someone called Rebecca Winters." Quinn's face hardened. "Reeves is framing me for the very crimes I was investigating." "When will they come?" Nora asked Theo, already moving to gather essential supplies. "At dawn," the boy repeated. "The marshal wants to surround the house while you're still sleeping." Quinn checked his pocket watch. "That gives us about 6 hours. We need to be long gone before then." "Where will you go?" Theo asked, his young face worried. Quinn hesitated, then made a decision. "Better if you don't know, son, for your own safety." The boy looked disappointed, but nodded in understanding. As Nora packed food and ammunition, Quinn retrieved the wooden box from beneath the mattress. He removed the journal and the charred note, tucking them securely inside his coat. "What about the badge?" Nora asked quietly, having noticed his selection. Quinn shook his head. "That part of my life is over." Within 30 minutes, they had packed the essentials onto Quinn's horse. The animal wouldn't be able to carry them both for long, but it could at least get them away from the immediate danger. "What about me?" Theo asked as they prepared to leave. "I can't go back to town now. They'll know I warned you." Quinn hadn't considered this complication. He exchanged a concerned look with Nora. "He's right," she said. "It won't be safe for him." Quinn ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "We can't take him with us, Nora. Where we're going, it's too dangerous." "I can help," Theo insisted. "I'm good with horses, and I can run messages." Before Quinn could refuse again, Nora knelt to look the boy in the eye. "Theo, do you have any relatives outside of town? Someone you could stay with for a while?" The boy thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My aunt lives in Silverton, about 20 miles south." "Perfect," Nora decided. "You'll go to her. Tell her there was trouble in town and you need to stay for a while." "But I want to help you," Theo protested. Quinn placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You already have Theo, more than you know. Now, the best thing you can do is stay safe." After providing Theo with directions and enough money for stage passage to Silverton, they watched him ride away on his pony, a small figure soon swallowed by the darkness. "He'll be all right," Nora assured Quinn, noting the concern in his expression. "I hope so," Quinn replied. "I've involved enough innocent people in this mess already." Nora's eyes met his, a challenge in their depths. "I'm not innocent, Quinn." And I'm involved by choice. He acknowledged this with a nod, then mounted his horse, extending his hand to help Nora up behind him. We need to reach Whisper Creek before Reeves realizes we've fled. It's our only chance to find the truth. As they rode away from the small house that had briefly been their haven, neither looked back. The past lay behind them, but so did the answers they sought. Their path now led into uncertainty, with danger close at their heels and dawn approaching all too quickly. They rode hard through the night, pushing Quinn's horse as much as they dared. The animal was strong, but carrying double weight, forcing them to alternate between riding and walking to conserve its strength. The rain had cleared completely, leaving a star-filled sky that helped guide their way. They avoided the main roads instead, following creek beds and game trails that Quinn remembered from hunting expeditions. "How far to Whisper Creek?" Nora asked during one of their walking periods, leading the horse to give it a brief rest. 3 days, if we keep to the wilderness," Quinn replied. "Less if we risk the roads, but that's too dangerous with Reeves looking for us." Nora nodded in agreement. "We should reach the foothills by morning. There's better cover there." Quinn glanced at her with mild surprise. "You know this country? I studied maps before coming south," she explained. "Wanted to know the lay of the land, possible routes to Whisper Creek." Again, Quinn was reminded of Nora's thoroughness and foresight, qualities that continued to impress him. "Good planning," he acknowledged. Dawn found them in the first gentle slopes of the foothills, where scattered pines provided welcome cover. They paused at a small spring to water the horse and refresh themselves. "We should rest for a few hours," Nora suggested, noting Quinn's fatigue. "The horse needs it, and so do you." Quinn wanted to argue, but knew she was right. They couldn't maintain this pace indefinitely. "A few hours," he conceded. "Then we push on." They made a simple camp in a protected hollow, using only fallen branches for bedding to avoid leaving obvious signs of their presence. Quinn insisted on taking the first watch, despite his exhaustion. "I'll wake you at noon," he promised. Nora looked like she might protest, but instead settled onto the makeshift bed with a nod. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Quinn leaned against a tree trunk, his revolver across his lap, and his eyes scanning their surroundings with the practiced vigilance of a lawman. Despite the danger of their situation, he found his thoughts drifting repeatedly to the woman sleeping nearby. In the short time they had known each other, Nora had become more important to him than he cared to admit. Her strength, her directness, her quiet dignity, all had worked their way past his carefully constructed defenses. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. A twig snapped somewhere in the distance, instantly bringing Quinn to full alertness. He listened intently, but no further sounds followed. Probably just a deer, he told himself, but remained vigilant. Hours passed without incident. The sun climbed higher, warming the forest around them. Quinn's eyelids grew heavy, despite his best efforts to remain alert. He must have dozed, for he woke with a start to find Nora kneeling beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "My turn," she said, simply taking the revolver from his slack grip. "You need sleep." Too exhausted to argue, Quinn surrendered to necessity. His last conscious thought was of Nora's profile against the dappled sunlight, watchful and serene. When he woke, the sun was already beginning its western descent. He sat up quickly, alarmed to have slept so long. "Why didn't you wake me?" he asked, finding Nora calmly rebraiding her long hair. "You needed the rest," she replied without apology. "And there's been no sign of pursuit." Quinn stretched, feeling remarkably refreshed, despite the circumstances. "We should move on soon. Cover as much ground as possible before dark." Nora nodded in agreement, finishing her braid with practiced efficiency. "I checked the horse. He's recovered well enough to continue." As they prepared to depart, Quinn studied their meager supplies with concern. Food will be a problem in another day. We need to hunt or find a safe place to purchase provisions. There's a trading post near Carson Pass, Nora suggested. Small place mostly serves trappers and Indians. Might be safer than a proper town. Quinn considered this. You've been there? No, but I heard of it from others at the mining camp. Said the owner doesn't ask questions or care much for law. It was a risk, but a necessary one. Quinn nodded his agreement. Carson Pass it is, then. Should reach it by tomorrow afternoon if we make good time. They mounted up and continued their journey, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they climbed higher into the foothills. The going was slower here, forcing them to pick their way carefully along narrow game trails. As dusk approached, they came upon a small plateau that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. In the far distance, barely visible in the fading light, lay Red Rock. Quinn reined in the horse, allowing them both to study the landscape spread before them. If Reeves is following, he'll be somewhere behind us, he observed, though I doubt he's found our trail yet. Nora's gaze remained fixed on the distant town. He won't give up easily, she noted, not with murder charges at stake. No, Quinn agreed grimly. He won't. They made camp that night in a small cave formed by an outcropping of rock. It provided shelter from the wind that had picked up as darkness fell, carrying with it the promise of more rain. A small, carefully tended fire provided enough heat to ward off the chill without creating a beacon for any pursuers. They shared the last of their bread and dried beef, eating sparingly to conserve what remained. Tomorrow we hunt, Quinn decided, watching the flames dance. Can't risk reaching the trading post with empty bellies. Nora nodded in agreement. I'm a fair shot if you have a rifle to spare. One rifle between us, Quinn replied. But I've seen your aim. You'll make better use of it than I would. The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly, brought a brief smile to Nora's lips. My father taught me. Said a woman alone needs to know how to provide for herself. Wise man, Quinn observed. He was. Nora's expression grew distant. He would have liked you, I think. Quinn wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected statement. Why do you say that? Nora considered for a moment. You're both men of few words, but when you speak, you mean what you say. And you both believe in doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Her assessment struck closer to home than Quinn might have expected. I'm not sure I deserve that comparison, he said quietly. I ran from Whisper Creek instead of staying to fight. You left to survive, Nora corrected him. To find the truth another way. That's not running, Quinn, that's strategy. He wanted to believe her, wanted to see his actions as something nobler than retreat. But the guilt of leaving the Redbird murders unsolved had weighed on him for 18 months. If I had stayed pushed harder for an investigation, he began. Then you might be dead, Nora finished for him. And the truth with you. Their eyes met across the fire, understanding passing between them. Nora didn't offer empty reassurances or absolution for choices made in the past. Instead, she acknowledged the reality of their situation and the necessity of moving forward. Get some sleep, Quinn finally said. I'll take first watch tonight. Nora didn't argue, merely wrapped herself in the single blanket they had brought and settled against the cave wall. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Quinn watched her for a moment, struck by the trust implicit in her ability to rest while in such danger. It was a gift he didn't take lightly. The night passed without incident, each taking their turn at watch. When dawn arrived, it brought with it the promised rain, a gentle but persistent drizzle that misted the forest and reduced visibility. Good hunting weather, Quinn observed as they prepared to break camp. Animals will be moving. Nora nodded in agreement. We should separate. Cover more ground. Quinn hesitated, reluctant to let her out of his sight in potentially dangerous territory. I don't like the idea of you alone out here. I've been alone in worse places, she reminded him with a raised eyebrow. I can handle myself. There was no arguing with that, nor did Quinn truly want to. One of the things he most respected about Nora was her self-sufficiency. 2 hours, he conceded. Meet back here whether you've caught something or not. They separated at the cave entrance, Nora taking the rifle while Quinn retained his revolver and a hunting knife. The mist swallowed her tall figure within moments, leaving Quinn with an unexpected sense of emptiness. He shook off the feeling and focused on the task at hand, moving silently through the wet undergrowth in search of game. The forest was quiet, save for the gentle patter of rain on leaves, making it easier to detect movement. After an hour of careful stalking, Quinn spotted a young deer grazing in a small clearing. He froze, calculating his chances with the knife at this distance. Before he could decide, a shot rang out from somewhere to his right. The deer bolted, disappearing into the trees. Quinn crouched instinctively, uncertain whether the shot had been Nora's or came from another hunter, or worse, a pursuer. Moving cautiously through the underbrush, Quinn headed in the direction of the gunfire. He hadn't gone far when he heard voices. Men's voices, speaking in low tones. Quinn dropped to his stomach, crawling forward until he could see through a screen of ferns. In a small clearing ahead, 2 men were examining something on the ground. With a jolt, Quinn recognized one of them, the burly man who had accompanied Prescott during their confrontation. "Fine shot, Garrett," the second man was saying. "Right through the heart." The first man, Garrett, grunted in acknowledgement as he knelt beside what Quinn now realized was a deer carcass. "Luck more than skill in this mist, but it'll feed us well enough." "Think they came this way?" the second man asked, scanning the forest as he spoke. Garrett shrugged. "Marshall seems to think so. Said Hayes, or Maxwell, whatever his name is, would head for the high country rather than risk the roads." Quinn's heart hammered against the damp earth. They were being pursued just as he had feared. And these men weren't simply bounty hunters, they were working with Reeves. "What about the woman?" the second man asked. "She dangerous, Apache," Garrett replied, as if that explained everything. "Marshall says to be careful. She might be more trouble than Hayes himself." Quinn began to back away slowly, needing to find Nora and warn her. A twig snapped beneath his hand, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet forest. Both men looked up sharply. "What was that?" the second man hissed, reaching for his rifle. Garrett held up a hand for silence, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the undergrowth where Quinn lay concealed. "Probably just a fox," he said after a moment. "But check it out while I finish with this deer." Quinn remained absolutely still as the second man approached his hiding-place rifle at the ready. The hunter was moving cautiously, his eyes alert for any movement. 10 feet away, 5 feet. Any closer, and discovery would be inevitable. A shot rang out from somewhere to the east, Nora's rifle. The second man pivoted immediately, attention diverted. "That's no fox," Garrett called, already on his feet. "Come on." The 2 men hurried away in the direction of the shot, leaving Quinn momentarily safe, but filled with new concern for Nora. He waited until they were out of sight before rising to a crouch and moving swiftly in the same direction, praying he would reach Nora before they did. The rain intensified, reducing visibility further and muffling sounds. Quinn pushed forward, guided more by instinct than sight. Another shot echoed through the trees, closer this time, followed by shouting. Quinn broke into a run, caution abandoned in his urgency. He burst into a small clearing to find a scene of chaos. Nora backed against a large tree, the rifle raised, but clearly empty of ammunition. Garrett and his companion approached from opposite sides, weapons trained on her. "Drop it, woman," Garrett was saying. "Nowhere to run now." Without hesitation, Quinn drew his revolver and fired into the air. All three figures in the clearing whirled toward him, surprised by his sudden appearance. "Back away from her," Quinn ordered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Now!" Garrett's companion obeyed instinctively, taking several steps back, but Garrett himself merely smiled an unpleasant expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Well now, if it isn't the man himself," he drawled. "Saved us the trouble of hunting you down, Maxwell." "The name's Hayes," Quinn corrected him, moving slowly to position himself between Nora and the hunters. "And we have no quarrel with you." "Maybe not," Garrett agreed. "But Marshal Reeves has a mighty big quarrel with you. Murder tends to upset lawmen like that." "I've murdered no one," Quinn stated flatly. "Tell it to the judge." Garrett's rifle remained trained on Quinn's chest. "Now drop that gun before someone gets hurt." Quinn assessed their options rapidly. 2 against 2, but Nora's rifle was empty, leaving them effectively outnumbered. Fighting would likely end badly. "Quinn," Nora said quietly from behind him. "Run." Before he could process her meaning, Nora charged at Garrett with unexpected speed, knocking his rifle aside with the stock of her own weapon. The moment of surprise was all Quinn needed. He fired at Garrett's companion, deliberately aiming low. The bullet struck the man in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground with a howl of pain. Garrett recovered quickly, swinging his rifle like a club toward Nora's head. She ducked beneath the blow, using her height to drive her shoulder into his midsection. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. Quinn rushed forward to help, but Nora had already freed herself from the grapple, delivering a sharp blow to Garrett's temple with a rock. The man went limp beneath her. "We need to go," she said urgently, rising to her feet. "There could be others." Quinn nodded, retrieving their weapons, while Nora quickly checked that neither man was fatally injured. They were alive, but would be unconscious for some time. "The cave is compromised," Quinn said as they hurried back through the forest. "We need to find another shelter." "The trading post," Nora suggested. "It's our best option now." Quinn agreed reluctantly. Their need for supplies and information outweighed the risk of encountering more of Reeves's men. They reached their temporary camp and collected their meager belongings, then mounted the horse and set off at the fastest pace the terrain would allow. The rain continued steadily, washing away tracks and providing some cover for their retreat. As they rode, Quinn couldn't help but be impressed by Nora's quick thinking and fighting ability. She had acted without hesitation, possibly saving both their lives. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked during a brief rest to water the horse. Nora's expression remained neutral. "Life teaches hard lessons when you're different," she replied simply. "I learned early that being tall and Indian meant I needed to be stronger than those who would harm me." Quinn nodded, understanding all too well how cruelty could shape a person. "You saved us back there." "We saved each other," she corrected him, "as I suspect we'll continue to do." Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As evening approached, the silhouette of a small, rough-hewn building appeared through the trees ahead. Carson Pass Trading Post, their destination, and perhaps their only chance for temporary safety in an increasingly dangerous journey. The Carson Pass Trading Post was a ramshackle structure nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. Its weathered logs and sagging roof suggested decades of hard winters, while the smoke curling from its stone chimney promised warmth within. Quinn and Nora approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of other visitors. A single horse stood in the crude stable attached to the building, but otherwise the clearing appeared deserted. "Let me do the talking," Quinn said quietly as they dismounted. "Trading post owners hear everything that happens in the territory. He might know something useful." Nora nodded agreement, adjusting her shawl to partially conceal her face. Her height would always make her noticeable, but there was no need to make identification easier for anyone who might come asking questions. They entered the dim interior to find a cavernous room filled with an eclectic assortment of goods. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to traps, ammunition, to bolts of cloth. The air smelled of tobacco leather and wood smoke. Behind a rough-hewn counter stood the proprietor, an elderly man with a wild shock of white hair and a beard that reached nearly to his waist. His rheumy eyes narrowed as he assessed the newcomers. "Don't get many visitors in weather like this," he observed, his voice a gravelly rasp. "What brings you folks to Carson Pass?" "Supplies," Quinn answered, simply approaching the counter, "and a place to dry out before continuing on." The old man nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Supplies I got plenty of. Shelter, too, if you don't mind sharing space with the mice. Got a loft above the store where travelers can bed down for 2 bits a night." "That'll do," Quinn agreed, placing coins on the counter. "We need food ammunition for a Winchester rifle and coffee if you have it." As the proprietor gathered their requested items, Quinn casually steered the conversation toward more useful information. "Quiet up here," he observed. "Much trouble on the trails lately." The old man snorted. "Always trouble somewhere. Had a federal marshal come through 3 days ago asking after fugitives." His eyes flickered briefly to Quinn's face. "Seems there's killers on the loose if you believe such tales." Quinn kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Anyone I should watch out for on the road ahead?" "Marshal didn't say much," the proprietor replied, measuring coffee beans into a small sack. "Just showed a poster with a man's face on it. Handsome fellow, if you don't mind my saying. Didn't look much like a killer to me. But then they never do." Nora had drifted toward the window, ostensibly examining bolts of fabric, while keeping watch outside. "There's a rider coming," she announced quietly. Quinn tensed, hand moving instinctively toward his revolver. The old man noticed the movement and chuckled. "No need for that, son. That'll be Esther Cole. Comes up from Red Rock once a month for supplies and gossip." The name meant nothing to Quinn, but the mention of Red Rock put him immediately on guard. Anyone from town might recognize them or have heard about the manhunt. A few moments later, the door opened to admit a woman in her 60s, dressed in practical riding clothes and a weather-beaten hat. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her blue eyes were sharp and alert as they swept the room. Those eyes widened slightly as they fell on Quinn and Nora. "Well now," she said softly, "isn't this interesting?" Quinn stiffened, preparing for trouble, but the woman merely removed her hat and approached the counter. "Afternoon, Jeb," she greeted the proprietor. "I see you've got company." "Just passing through," Jeb replied with a shrug. "Looking to resupply before heading on." Esther Cole nodded her gaze, returning to Quinn with unsettling intensity. "Heading to Whisper Creek, are you?" The direct question caught Quinn off guard. He hesitated, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected confrontation. Nora moved to stand beside him, her presence a silent show of support. "What makes you think that?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Esther smiled, the expression softening her weathered features. "Because that's where the answers are," she replied cryptically. "For both of you." Quinn's hand had returned to his revolver. "Who are you?" "A friend," Esther said simply. "At least I was a friend to Everett Maxwell, and to Rebecca Winters." The names of his father and Rebecca sent a jolt through Quinn. "How did you—" "No," Esther finished for him. "You have your father's eyes, boy. And I've been expecting someone to come looking for the truth sooner or later. She glanced at Nora. Though I admit I didn't expect you'd bring a red bird with you. Nora inhaled sharply. You knew my family. Esther nodded, her expression softening further. Your Uncle Thomas was a good man. What happened to him and his family was a crime that cries out for justice. She looked between them, then at the bemused Jeb. But this isn't the place for such conversations. Too many ears, even in the wilderness. The proprietor raised his hands in mock surrender. Don't involve me in whatever trouble you're stirring, Esther. I mind my business, and that's how I've stayed alive this long. Wise as always, Jeb, Esther acknowledged with a nod. She turned back to Quinn and Nora. I have a cabin about 2 miles west of here. You'll be safe there tonight. We can talk freely. Quinn exchanged a glance with Nora silently, debating whether to trust this strange woman who seemed to know too much about them. Nora gave a slight nod, indicating her willingness to take the risk. All right, Quinn decided. Lead the way. They completed their purchases quickly, thanking Jeb for his discretion. The old man merely shrugged. Ain't seen nobody, he assured them. That's my policy. Outside, Esther mounted her horse, an aging but well-kept mare. Follow me, she instructed, and stay alert. Reeves has men scattered throughout these hills. The mention of the marshal's name confirmed that Esther was indeed knowledgeable about their situation. Quinn helped Nora onto their horse before mounting behind her, and they set off after the older woman, heading deeper into the forest. True to her word, Esther's cabin appeared after about 2 miles of difficult terrain. A small but sturdy structure tucked against a cliff face that provided natural shelter from the elements. A small stream gurgled nearby, and a well-tended garden suggested permanent habitation rather than occasional use. Not much to look at, Esther commented as they dismounted. But it's warm and safe. No one comes this way unless invited. Inside the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area adjacent. Simple but well-crafted furniture filled the space, a table with chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, and a curtained-off sleeping area in one corner. Esther busied herself lighting the fire and preparing coffee, while Quinn and Nora shed their wet outer garments. The atmosphere was oddly domestic, considering the circumstances of their meeting. Now then, Esther said, once they were settled with steaming cups before them, I expect you have questions. How did you know my father? Quinn asked directly, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Esther's expression softened with remembrance. I was a nurse in Whisper Creek for many years. Your father and we were close once upon a time, before he met your mother. Quinn absorbed this revelation with surprise. His father had never mentioned such a relationship. And Rebecca, he pressed. My niece, Esther replied, pain flickering across her features. She came to work for your father after completing her schooling. Bright girl determined to make a difference. She was murdered, Quinn stated flatly. Esther nodded grimly. Yes, because she knew too much. Because she had proof of what they were doing. Who are they? Nora interjected. The mining company, Esther answered. Western Continental. They've been buying up land all through the territory, or taking it when buying isn't possible. Quinn leaned forward intently. My father was investigating them before he died. He was close to exposing them, Esther confirmed, had documented evidence of their methods, forged deeds, intimidation, even murder disguised as accidents. The Redbirds, Nora said quietly. Esther's eyes turned to her with sympathy. Your uncle's family was one of several who refused to sell their land. It contained something Western Continental wanted badly. Gold, Quinn guessed. Esther shook her head. Water. The Redbird property sits atop an underground spring that feeds half the valley. Western Continental needs that water for their mining operations. Without it, the gold they've discovered is worthless. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, so they orchestrated my father's death to look like suicide, Quinn reasoned, then killed the Redbirds and tried to frame me when I started asking questions. Yes, Esther agreed, but they made a mistake. Rebecca had copied your father's evidence and hidden it before they killed her. Quinn's heart quickened. Where? I don't know exactly, Esther admitted. But Rebecca told me she'd hidden it beneath the dust where it all began. Quinn and Bora exchanged a startled look. The truth lies beneath the dust, Nora quoted. That's what was on the note I found at the Redbird fire, Quinn explained to Esther. Someone was trying to leave a message about the evidence. Esther nodded slowly. That would be Thomas Redbird. He and Rebecca were friends. She might have told him where she hid the documents. So the evidence is still out there, Quinn mused, which explains why Reeves is so determined to find me after all this time. Western Continental is planning something big, Esther confirmed. They've been buying more land, bringing in heavy equipment. Whatever it is, they can't risk the evidence surfacing now. We need to find those documents, Nora stated firmly. For my family, and for yours, Quinn. Quinn nodded in agreement, then turned back to Esther. Why are you helping us? You're putting yourself at risk. The older woman's face hardened with determination. I've waited 2 years for justice for Rebecca and Everett. I'm tired of waiting. She looked between them, her expression softening slightly. Besides, you two remind me of what might have been in another life. The comment hung in the air, laden with meaning neither Quinn nor Nora was quite ready to acknowledge. As night fell, Esther insisted they remain at her cabin until morning. You need rest, and your horse needs it more, she pointed out practically. Reeves won't find you here. Despite his instinct to keep moving, Quinn recognized the wisdom in her suggestion. They had been pushing themselves hard, and exhaustion would only lead to mistakes. Esther prepared a simple but hearty stew for dinner, then insisted Nora take her bed while she and Quinn would make do with blankets near the fire. The arrangement was modest but comfortable, and the security of 4 solid walls after days on the run was undeniable. As Nora retired behind the curtain, Quinn found himself alone with Esther, who rocked gently in her chair, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. She's special, that one, Esther observed quietly, strong in ways that most wouldn't understand. Quinn nodded, unable to disagree. We've only known each other a short time. Time isn't always the measure of connection, Esther replied with the wisdom of age. Some souls recognize each other instantly. Quinn didn't respond, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Esther seemed to sense this and changed tack. You should know, she said more soberly, Reeves isn't just a marshal. He's Western Continental's man through and through, has been for years. That explains why he ruled my father's death a suicide without a proper investigation, Quinn noted bitterly. Esther nodded. He's dangerous, Quinn, more than you might realize. He's killed before to protect their interests, and he'll do it again without hesitation. I'll be careful, Quinn assured her. Not just for yourself, Esther cautioned, glancing toward the curtained area where Nora slept. For her, too. She's lost enough already. The warning was unnecessary. Quinn had already determined to protect Nora at any cost. But he appreciated Esther's concern. Get some rest, the older woman advised, rising from her chair. Tomorrow you'll need your strength. Whisper Creek is still a day's hard ride away, and who knows what awaits you there. As Quinn settled onto his blankets near the hearth, He found his thoughts turning not to the dangers ahead, but to the woman sleeping just a few feet away. Esther's words echoed in his mind. Some souls recognize each other instantly. He had never been one to believe in such things, yet he couldn't deny the connection he felt with Nora, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Sleep came eventually, bringing with it dreams of fire, and hidden truths of badges tarnished and then renewed, and throughout a tall figure walking beside him, steadfast and true. Morning arrived with clear skies and renewed purpose. After a simple breakfast, Quinn and Nora prepared to depart, their supplies replenished and their determination strengthened by Esther's information. "Take the North Trail," Esther advised as they mounted up. "It's longer, but less traveled. Reeves will have men watching the main approaches to Whisper Creek." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely, reaching down to clasp the older woman's hand. "For everything." Esther squeezed her hand in return. "Find the truth," she urged them both, "for all of us who've waited too long for justice." With that blessing, they set off, leaving the safety of Esther's cabin for the uncertainty that lay ahead. Whisper Creek awaited with all its ghosts and secrets, and somewhere beneath its dust, the truth that could finally set them free. The northern approach to Whisper Creek wound through pine forests that gradually gave way to rolling hills. Quinn rode slowly, memories flooding back with each familiar landmark. 2 years had passed since he'd fled this place, yet it felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Nora sat behind him, her presence steadying as they navigated terrain laden with ghosts from Quinn's past. "We should stop here," he said, reining in the horse at a hill overlooking the valley. Below, Whisper Creek was visible, wooden buildings straddling the creek that gave it its name. They dismounted, while Quinn surveyed the town through Esther's borrowed field glasses. The main street appeared unchanged. The sheriff's office, general store, cattleman's saloon, all in their familiar places. "Doesn't look like much," Nora observed. "It isn't," Quinn agreed. "Just another struggling frontier town. But people died for the land it sits on." "What's our plan?" Quinn lowered the field glasses. "We can't just ride in. I'd be recognized immediately, and you'd draw attention." "So we wait for nightfall," Nora concluded. "Yes, and we'll need to be careful. Reeves might have men watching the town." They retreated to trees that provided cover while maintaining their view. As the sun descended, they shared the last of Esther's food, conserving strength for the night ahead. "Tell me about the Redbird property," Quinn requested. "Esther said it was valuable because of the water." "My uncle wrote about the spring that ran even in the driest summers," Nora replied. "In Apache tradition, water is sacred. My uncle would have understood its value beyond practical uses. And Western Continental wants it for mining. Gold requires enormous amounts of water." "Which explains why they were willing to kill for it," Nora added grimly. Their conversation was interrupted by riders approaching from town. They retreated deeper into the trees, watching as 4 men passed below. "Reeves's men," Nora whispered once they'd passed. "Probably," Quinn agreed. "They're patrolling the approaches, just as Esther warned." They finalized their plans as darkness fell. They would leave the horse tethered approaching town separately on foot. Quinn from the west, near the old mill, Nora from the east, along the creek bed. They would meet at the church and check Rebecca's grave first, then Quinn's father's house. "Be careful," Quinn said, the words inadequate for all he wanted to express. Nora briefly clasped his hand. "You too." Quinn moved cautiously through town, keeping to shadows. Whisper Creek at night was quiet, with only the saloon showing signs of life. The sheriff's office stood at the center, a lantern burning in its window. Quinn glimpsed a young man inside. the new sheriff, presumably. He reached the church without incident and waited in the shadow of an oak tree. Minutes passed with no sign of Nora. Just as Quinn considered searching for her, a whisper came from the darkness. "Quinn!" Relief washed over him as Nora materialized from the shadows. "Any trouble?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. The creek bed was clear, but there are men patrolling the eastern road. In the cemetery, they located Rebecca's grave. The headstone read, "Rebecca Winter's beloved daughter and friend. Truth will prevail." "My father chose those words," Quinn murmured. "Said she believed that above all else." They searched around the grave, but found nothing to indicate hidden documents. Approaching Quinn's childhood home, they found it dark and seemingly abandoned, its yard overgrown. Inside the house was musty and thick with dust. Quinn stood in the kitchen, momentarily overwhelmed by memories. Nora placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Where should we look?" "My father's study, upstairs." The study remained largely as Quinn remembered it. Bookshelves lining the walls, a solid oak desk, a worn leather chair. They searched methodically but found nothing. "Beneath the dust where it all began," Nora repeated thoughtfully. Could dust be metaphorical? In Apache tradition, we speak of returning to dust when we die. Quinn straightened a new possibility forming. The first suspicious death connected to Western Continental was a rancher named Miller. He refused to sell his land and was found hanged in his barn. My father never believed it was suicide. Where was his property? North of town, not far from your uncle's land. In fact, they were neighbors. Miller's death was what first led my father to investigate Western Continental. That could be where it all began, Nora concluded. Where we need to look. A sound from downstairs interrupted them, the unmistakable creak of the front door. Quinn extinguished their candle, plunging the room into darkness. Footsteps moved through the lower floor, deliberate and unhurried. Quinn gestured for Nora to remain in the study while he crept to the stairs. Through the banister, he saw a tall figure carrying a shuttered lantern. "I know you're here, Maxwell," Marshal Harlan Reeves called softly. "We can make this easy or difficult." Quinn retreated to the study and positioned himself behind the door, while Nora moved to the desk for cover. The footsteps reached the hallway, approaching with measured confidence. As Reeves stepped into the room, Quinn pressed his revolver against the marshal's head. "Drop the gun." Reeves slowly lowered his weapon. Quinn kicked it across to Nora. "Let's talk about Western Continental and what happened to my father," Quinn said coldly. "You're making a mistake," Reeves replied. "There's still a way out. Western Continental is willing to be generous, $20,000, enough to start a new life far from here. You think I came back for money? Why else revenge? That's a fool's game. Your father learned that the hard way." The casual reference to his father's death sent anger through Quinn. "I came for justice, for my father, Rebecca Winters, and the Redbird family." Reeves's gaze shifted to Nora. "You're Thomas Redbird's kin." "His niece," she confirmed, her expression hard as stone. "A touching reunion, the son of the disgraced sheriff and the niece of the stubborn Indian." Reeves smiled coldly. "You realize you're both dead already. You just don't know it yet." A commotion outside drew their attention, voices shouting, running footsteps. "My men," Reeves explained. "Did you really think I'd come alone?" Quinn made a swift decision. "Reeves comes with us. He's our insurance." They forced Reeves down a rarely used servant's staircase to the kitchen, slipping out the back door just as lantern light appeared at the front. Once in the forest, Quinn directed them north, toward the Miller property. "This is futile," Reeves commented as they moved through the darkness. "My men will track you. Every road is watched." "Then you'll have plenty of time to answer our questions," Quinn replied. As dawn approached, they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley where the abandoned Miller farm stood partially visible through morning mist. "You think you'll find answers there?" Reeves laughed harshly. "Miller's place has been picked clean. I supervised the search myself after his suicide." "Then you won't mind if we look for ourselves," Nora countered. The barn had weathered better than the farmhouse, its doors partially open. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of early morning light. "Miller was found hanging from that beam," Reeves volunteered, nodding toward a crossbeam. Quinn and Nora searched methodically while Reeves watched with amusement. After nearly an hour, Quinn's frustration mounted. "There has to be something here." "Where did your father begin his investigation of Miller's death?" Nora asked suddenly. Quinn remembered his father's journal. He mentioned a discrepancy in the barn floor, said it had been recently disturbed when Miller died. With renewed purpose, Quinn examined the area beneath the beam. Years of dust had settled, but he detected variations in the soil's coloration. "Here," he called, identifying a section that appeared to have been dug up and replaced. "Help me with this." Together, they excavated the area. About 2 feet down, Quinn's tool struck wood. They uncovered a small chest, which Quinn pried open with his knife. Inside, protected by oilskin wrapping, were papers and a journal. "The evidence," Quinn confirmed quickly, scanning them. "Records of land transfers, witness statements, details of threats. It's all here. Everything needed to prove Western Continental's crimes." Reeves showed genuine alarm. "You'll never get them to the proper authorities. Western Continental has too much power. According to these records, they've been operating illegally on federal land," Quinn replied. "That's a crime even your influence can't cover up." The sound of approaching riders reached them. The barn door crashed open, revealing Walter Prescott and 2 companions. "Well now," Prescott drawled, leveling a shotgun, "isn't this a surprise? The marshal himself, all trussed up like a Christmas turkey." "Prescott," Quinn acknowledged cautiously. "This doesn't concern you." Walter laughed unpleasantly. $5,000 for your capture concerns me plenty, and another 1,000 for the woman." Before Quinn could respond, one of Prescott's men shifted his aim toward Reeves. "The marshal was supposed to bring them in. Looks like he failed." "Western Continental doesn't tolerate failure," the second man added ominously. Reeves's eyes widened with fear. "Wait," he began, struggling against his bonds. "This isn't what it looks like. Maxwell ambushed me." "Save it for Mr. Garrett," Prescott interrupted. "He's on his way with the rest of the men." Quinn exchanged a glance with Nora. If Prescott's men were focused on Reeves, it might create an opportunity. "The documents," Quinn said loudly. "Is that what Garrett wants?" "What documents?" "The ones proving Western Continental murdered Miller, my father, Rebecca Winters, and the Redbird family," Quinn stated. "The ones we just found buried beneath this floor." The revelation created enough distraction. Quinn kicked over rotting hay bales, creating a dust cloud, while pushing Nora toward the side door. "Go!" he shouted, firing at Prescott. Chaos erupted. Prescott's shotgun boomed pellets, embedding in wood. His companions fired wildly. Quinn backed toward the exit, continuing to fire. Just before escaping, he glimpsed Reeves slumping against his post, hit by stray shot. Outside, Nora waited, revolver ready. "This way," she urged, pointing toward a ravine. They ran as shots continued behind them. The ravine provided temporary shelter, but they couldn't outrun mounted pursuers. "We need horses," Quinn gasped as they paused to catch their breath. Nora pointed to a distant rise. "More riders coming. Probably Garrett's men." Quinn felt despair. They were being closed in from both directions. "The documents," Nora said suddenly. "We need to ensure they're found, even if we don't make it." She pointed to a stream running along the ravine. "The creek eventually joins Whisper Creek, which runs through town. If we secure the package properly—" Quinn understood immediately. The waterproof oilskin would protect the documents, and the current would carry them beyond their pursuers' reach. They reinforced the wrapping with Quinn's bandana, then tied the bundle to a small piece of wood. Just as pursuit grew dangerously close, they placed their precious cargo into the stream. "Now what?" Nora asked. Quinn checked his revolver. Only 2 bullets remained. "We keep moving, maybe reach high ground for a defensible position." As they rounded a bend in the ravine, they came face to face with a solitary figure, a young boy on a small pony. "Theo!" Quinn exclaimed in disbelief. The boy's face lit up. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Redbird, I found you." "What are you doing here?" Nora asked sharply. "You were supposed to go to Silverton." "I couldn't leave knowing you were in trouble," Theo replied. "I brought help." Before Quinn could question further, 3 riders appeared, Esther Cole and 2 weather-beaten men with rifles. "The boy found me in town," Esther explained, dismounting. "Said you were headed for trouble." "This is Joshua and Franklin," she introduced her companions. "They've had their own troubles with Western Continental." "We need to move," Quinn said urgently. "Prescott's men are right behind us and more riders are coming from the north." "Garrett!" Franklin spat like a curse. "Western Continental's enforcer." "We have horses waiting beyond that ridge," Esther pointed eastward. "But we need to move now." Quinn helped Nora onto Esther's mare, then mounted behind Joshua. Theo remained on his pony, looking both frightened and exhilarated. "What about the documents?" Esther asked. "We sent them downstream," Quinn explained. "The creek feeds into Whisper Creek, right?" Esther's eyes widened. "Yes, and it flows right past Judge Morrison's property on the south edge of town." "Morrison?" Nora questioned. "The circuit judge," Franklin explained. "Only honest man with any power in these parts." Gunfire erupted behind them. Prescott's men had spotted them. "Ride!" Joshua shouted, spurring his horse forward. Quinn glanced back to see several riders emerge from the ravine. "Franklin, take Nora and Theo ahead with Esther. Joshua and I will hold them off." "Quinn, no!" Nora began to protest. "The documents are what matter. You need to ensure they're found." Their eyes held for a moment, containing all they had no time to say. "I'll see you at Morrison's," Nora said finally before riding on with the others. Quinn and Joshua took position behind fallen logs. As Prescott's men approached, Joshua fired, sending one tumbling from his saddle. The others scattered, advancing more cautiously. Movement to the north caught Quinn's attention, more riders approaching fast. His heart sank. "That's not Garrett's bunch," Joshua said surprisingly. "Look how they're riding." As the group drew nearer, Quinn saw details that didn't fit Western Continental's men. Several wore badges catching the sunlight. "The sheriff's posse," Joshua realized aloud. At their head rode a distinguished older man in a black coat. Not a lawman, but someone with authority. "Judge Morrison," Quinn said in disbelief. Prescott's men, caught between Joshua's rifle and the approaching posse, quickly surrendered. The judge approached Quinn's position. "Mr. Maxwell," Morrison called, "I believe you've been looking for me." "How did you find us?" Quinn asked, emerging from cover. "Your young friend Theo reached my house before dawn, babbling about documents in the creek and men hunting you down," Morrison explained. "When a creek deposit proved to contain some very interesting reading material, I decided his story warranted investigation." "You found the documents," Quinn said with relief. "Indeed, most disturbing evidence of Western Continental's criminal activities. Sheriff Daniels was quite eager to form a posse once he read what your father and Miss Winters had documented." "What about Garrett?" Joshua asked. "Being escorted to town as we speak," Morrison replied calmly. "He wasn't prepared for an official reception." "And Reeves?" Quinn asked. "Dead, I'm afraid. Shot during what Prescott described as a disagreement about protocol, though I suspect the marshal knew too much to testify." Quinn nodded grimly. "Nora, she and the others were headed for the pass. My deputies are already intercepting them," Morrison assured him. "They'll be brought safely to town." A rider appeared, waving his hat to signal success. "It appears your friends have been found," the judge observed. "Shall we return to town? There's much to discuss about Western Continental's future in this territory." 1 month later, the Redbird homestead stood silent in the early morning light, its charred remains a stark reminder of the violence that had claimed Thomas Redbird and his family. Nora moved slowly through the ruins, touching blackened timbers, kneeling occasionally to sift through ashes. Quinn followed at a respectful distance. "They built this themselves," she said finally. "My uncle wrote to my father about raising the roof beams, how the neighbors came to help, even though they were strangers. Different. People can surprise you sometimes," Quinn observed. "Yes," Nora agreed, looking up with a small smile. "They can." In the month since the confrontation, much had changed. Western Continental's operations had been shut down pending federal investigation. Several company officials were arrested, others fled the territory. The land they had stolen was being returned to rightful owners, a process Judge Morrison personally oversaw. Nora, as Thomas Redbird's closest living relative, had inherited his property, 40 acres of prime land with the underground spring. Today was her first visit to what was now her land. During their return to Whisper Creek, Sheriff Daniels had discovered a small leather pouch buried near the spring on the Redbird property. Inside was a wooden eagle carving that Nora recognized as her cousin Sarah's, and a note from her uncle. "To whoever finds this, we know they are coming. We have refused to sell our water to the mining company, and now they threaten us. If anything happens, remember that water gives life, and the truth lies beneath the dust. Thomas Redbird." Thomas had known they were in danger and tried to leave evidence that might eventually bring his killers to justice. "What will you do with the land?" Quinn asked as they walked its boundaries. The spring bubbled up in a clearing, forming a crystal-clear pool before flowing away as a stream. "Build," Nora said thoughtfully. "Not just a house, but a home. A place where water is honored for the gift it is not exploited for gold." Quinn nodded. "It's good land. A person could put down roots here." "Yes," she agreed, her eyes meeting his. "A person could." They had been inseparable since the showdown with Garrett, staying at Judge Morrison's home while legal matters were settled. Yet neither had spoken directly of what would come after. "I've been offered my father's position," Quinn said. "Sheriff Daniels is moving to Santa Fe." "Will you take it?" Nora asked, her voice carefully neutral. Quinn shook his head. "I've worn the badge, walked that path. It cost my father his life." "Then what will you do?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Quinn turned to face her fully. "That depends on you, Nora." "On me?" "Yes," Quinn confirmed, taking a step deeper into vulnerability than he'd ever risked. "Because where you are is where I want to be. If you'll have me, For a long moment, Nora was silent. Then she took his hands in hers. "I would build this home with you, Quinn Maxwell," she said, her voice low and certain. "If that's what you're asking." "It is," he replied, smiling. "That's exactly what I'm asking." "We should tell Theo," Nora said after a while. "He's been worried about where he'll go after all this is over." Quinn nodded. "He should be with us. After everything he's done, he's earned a place." "A family," Nora said softly. "Something neither of us thought we'd have again." The words settled between them right and true. Family, not by blood, but by choice. By shared courage and hardship, by a future they would build together from the ashes of their separate pasts. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Quinn thought of his father, of Rebecca, of the Redbird family. Their deaths had set him on this path, had eventually led him to Nora. There was sorrow in that, but also grace, that from such tragedy could come new beginnings. "Do you believe in patterns?" he asked, remembering Nora's words from what seemed a lifetime ago. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "In things meant to align like stars, forming constellations." Quinn looked up at the night sky, at familiar patterns taking shape. "Perhaps we're part of the same pattern after all." Nora's hand tightened on his. "Perhaps we are." The future stretched before them, uncertain, but full of promise. There would be challenges. Western Continental's influence ran deep, and changing hearts and minds would take time. But they would face those challenges together on land reclaimed beside water that would give life rather than gold. "Truth from the dust," Quinn murmured, thinking of the note that had started it all. "And life from the ashes," Nora added. As the creek flowed beneath the stars, carrying its ancient whispers toward a horizon yet unseen, Quinn and Nora sat together planning the home they would build, founded on justice hard-won and a love that had emerged against all odds from fire and truth.